So I'd like to start by taking a bigger picture look at aviation sustainability. If you're at the webinar in July around aircraft ground operations, you'll have heard that sustainability is a strategic concern for civil aviation. Now, despite the challenges that aviation's faced over the last 12 months and is likely to still face, sustainability is still a big issue. So on the next slide, you'll see the amount of emissions attributable to aviation currently varies depending on source, but it's generally around 2.5%. And even though the number of flights has decreased dramatically in the last year, it's anticipated that aviation's contribution to climate change will remain at similar levels. However, as ATAG, the Air Transport Action Group, noted, green recovery affords us an extraordinary opportunity for air travel. Now, while it might seem easy to make changes in other industries, the complex nature of aviation means that it can take longer to implement and to see the benefits of lasting change. Compare it to electric vehicles, which have been around for a while. The infrastructure is here to support charging, and the general public can easily see what an electric car looks and sounds like. However, it's harder to see if a plane is using sustainable aviation fuel or if it's more fuel efficient. So to all intents and purposes, planes still look the same, so you can understand why there might be a perception that things aren't happening. But it's not the case. Progress has been made. Aviation is considered to be 54% more efficient than it was in 1990, based on the CO2 emissions per passenger kilometre, and that's down to improvements in technology and operations. But the plans for a carbon neutral or net zero future for aviation are a long way out. And looking at the timeline here, you'll see there are some ambitious goals. Boeing and Airbus have targets in the next 10 to 20 years for biofuel powered and climate neutral aircraft, while Rolls-Royce are aiming to be net zero. Norway is aiming to have all short-haul flights taking place in electric planes by 2040. And 2050 is a very popular year for targets, with the industry goal of net CO2 emissions to be half 2005 levels, net zero European aviation to be in place through improvements including aircraft and engine technology and improved air traffic management and aircraft ops, while ACI, Airport Council International's Europe's Net Zero 2050 pledge commits the whole European airport industry to eliminating the carbon footprint under its control by this date. Also in 2050, One World Alliance members have united with a collaborative approach towards net zero targets that includes efficiency measures and waste reductions. And other airlines have also stated their aims for carbon neutral or net zero goals along this timeline. Unsurprisingly, sustainable aviation fuels and market-based measures for carbon offsets play a big part in these goals. However, following the publication of the Waypoint 2050 report, which is an excellent read from ATAG that sets out the pathways to meet the industry's 2050 goal, the thinking indicates that the net zero ambition for global air transport may still be 40 to 45 years away, and it requires the right advances in technology and significant support from governments. So on the next slide, it's time to think, how do you correlate these very high level ambitions with what's happening today? 40 to 45 years is a long way away. Now, if you consider that around 91% of emissions are from the flight stages of a journey, then innovations for new aircraft design can undoubtedly help with lighter planes and more efficient flight, while air navigation and climate optimized routing will contribute to cleaner and more streamlined flight paths. SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, has potential for big impacts. So that's a lot of emissions that can be removed from aviation. But what about the emissions on the ground? So back in the July webinar again, the point was made that ground operations can consume between 5 to 10% of overall aviation fuel, and that inefficiencies are abundant across ops processes. Now, this isn't perhaps surprising, as the focus is very much on aircraft turnaround, safe and efficient operations, and disruption management. After all, the airport's a fast-paced, time-critical environment. On-time departures are key to avoiding those dreaded delays. Airport collaborative decision-making has already helped realise many operational benefits in a process driven by data analysis and sharing between stakeholders. But if you want to further emissions from ground reductions activity, where do you start? Data is still king and can be used to bring new insights, but it's key to understand if the right data is being collected, how it's being collected, and where from. But with technology like the Internet of Things, it should be easier, more timely, and more accurate now than ever before. Now, once you have that information, and there's likely to be a lot of it, where do you find those insights that you can exploit? And how do you encourage your teams on the ground to engage with them? One of the straightforward facts about people is that we like simplicity. we don't like hassle. Let's face it, sometimes our attention span is limited. So how do you meld this data with a desire to effect change to benefit sustainability? Well, it's important that we figure it out quickly. Think back to that net zero target that ACI set in Europe. Over 330 airports are actively engaged in reducing emissions, as are many airlines. And these demands are being passed on through supply chains who will be expected to play their part in contributing towards reduction goals. So moving on to the next slide, changing the context can help. If you shift the lens on operational activities to have a sustainability theme, then you have the opportunity to see things in a new light. We've already seen positive moves towards the use of electric ground power units to replace diesel and sustainable taxiing. The use of AI and machine learning for predictive analytics for airport and airline operations has been for a while, but there is much more room for that to grow. Other initiatives around efficiencies have included more precise fuel and water uplift, moving in-flight entertainment onto passengers' own devices, and adapting in-flight catering for less waste. And these all help to reduce the overall weight of the aircraft and result in less fuel being required and therefore less emissions. You can also see fuel benefits from dynamic routing and continuous descent patterns, while on-time departures and less waiting on the taxiway again equals less fuel use and less emissions, but also less pollution at the airport. And even areas like de-icing, only progressing a plane when there's the ability to send it directly to the runway for takeoff, can mean less use of de-icing agents, less runoff of those agents into the groundwater, and less impact on biodiversity. So it all adds up. But there's a common theme with all of these innovations. They're very process oriented and they're not driven by behavioural change. So there's a need to link the two and to frame the end goal in a sustainability context. So how do you make it sustainable, relevant, tangible, and personal? So on the next slide, it's really about how you bring these things to the individuals. At the airport, you're seeing a change in demographics. You might see more younger people working at airports, those who are aware of environmental considerations, but who might not be clear on how they can relate this passion to their job. Some people might just be focused on getting the job done, and both are perfectly reasonable attitudes. So the key is to make any activity or requirement relevant, tangible, and personal. Now, back in the July webinar, the point was made that overcoming roadblocks and deploying the right levers for change is very much a team sport. So understanding how the desired actions impact not just you, but your team and your company can make a real difference. It also makes a difference knowing that these activities are related to daily tasks, but there needs to be credibility and an understanding that there's a clear linkage between what you're being asked to do and the possible outcomes, in this case, improving sustainability. Clear and relevant information is important to show that making and applying changes brings tangible results, and that impacts and outcomes are tracked and measurable. After all, everyone likes to know that they're making good progress in what they're doing. And finally, it's vital to make it personal. Ensuring that it's clear the role that each person has to play makes it easier to implement. Remember that point about us humans liking to keep things simple and not wanting any hassle? Got to keep it really, really easy to understand. But there's a positive note here too. By being clear about sustainability aims, you might find some hidden gems. People have great ideas who are enthused by what they see. So you need to make sure that there's a way for them to contribute. So lastly, on my last slide, really it's a question of how you make it even easier. Now, nudge theory or behavioral economics has been around for a while, and whether you realize it or not, you've probably already been the recipient of nudges to drive small changes in behavior, from being urged to reuse your towel at a hotel to being encouraged to recycle more. And we'll hear more about some great examples with the following speakers. Small nudges have the power to make big impacts, and one of the most famous examples was the addition of a fly printed onto the urinals at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. It helped reduce mess and therefore significantly reduce cleaning costs. And it's a great example of a simple idea, easily implemented, and it requires very little effort to see big returns. So I happen to believe that if the industry takes the opportunity to find new ways to combine insights from data with a very personal approach to drive behaviour change, for those involved in operations at airlines and airports, then we have the chance to make a positive impact for the long-term sustainability of aviation. And you'll have some fascinating insights from my following speakers. Thank you.